Good evening, everybody. It is 8:30 p.m. on Friday night. It is Friday. Nearly said Thursday then. That's me. It's Friday night. It is 8:30 p.m. UK time. So anybody that joins in and watches after the live, please just drop hashtag replay or pop questions in. And I'm sure that our beautiful panel guests will get back to you if they can or as soon as. And there'll always be somebody to point in the right direction. So while we're just waiting for everybody to come in, hang on. We're getting a little bit of feedback. John, have we got any email?
That was me. Sorry. That was me. I was trying to share to my group.
Did you hear that, Neil? She's giving us feedback. I'm like, give me feedback. Don't give me feedback. So, good evening, everybody joining. We are live on Facebook and YouTube, Ian. And if you've got any links to share, if you want to send me, mention your links in a bit, but send me your links and I can share them on our page so people know where they can find you and get in touch if they need to. Evening, Anne, my lovely lady, how are you? Take a minute. Do you know, I hate this delay on Facebook on answering because I don't like quiet, so I have to have talking. So what I'm going to do is, while waiting for people to come in and start sharing. So Lana, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then I'm going to go to Neil last because then more will be in.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Lana Grabinskis. I'm a psychic artist. I'm a visionary artist and also a conventional artist. I do a number of things: paranormal investigations and soul rescue. And that's me in a nutshell.
Marvelous. Paul?
So I'm a clinical hypnotherapist. Most people know me for my past life regression work through hypnosis. I'm a master practitioner of neurolinguistic programming. So I help get people from their stuck state to their desired state. And I found it hugely beneficial for myself, hypnosis, past life regressions, and NLP. So I really like sharing that with other people.
Marvelous. And tonight's special guest is Neil. So really, we've all heard about Lana and Paul, so it's Neil we're going to focus on tonight. Poor Neil. Neil. So do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and your interests, hobbies, and what got you into the paranormal and all the sidelines off the paranormal, because there's so much
the many branches.
There is.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me on, first of all. It's lovely to be here. So I'm Neil Geddes Ward. I'm an artist as well, so I do what some people might call pagan and visionary or fantasy artwork, but I've also done traditional artwork where it might be portraiture, commissions, animals, dogs, planes, and that kind of thing. But my interest is more in the fantasy, visionary, science fiction realm. So I do a lot of artwork around those themes as well. I've also a lapsed musician. I've been in a band for a few years, so I play the bass guitar and a little bit of the synthesizer. I won't try and ruin the evening by attempting to sing because that's not where one of my skills lie. But I've also got an interest in the paranormal. So that started many, many, many years ago when I was small, because I asked my mum once, I said, "Mum, where was I before I was born?" And she said, "You never existed." And I said, "But I must have existed." And I just could not understand why I did not exist before. Wow. And so that just rattled in my head for quite a few years, thinking I don't understand this sort of thing. And then one time I picked up a magazine, I think it was the Reader's Digest, and it had an article in there where someone apparently floated out their body. They died temporarily on the operating table, and they sort of saw a light in a tunnel, and they went there and they was told to go back and that kind of stuff. And that got me fascinated, and that started to kind of turn the cogs of my interest into this field. And then I started to watch programs that anything ghosts in or spirits, anything like that, and magical mystery kind of programs. I remember in the 1970s when I was growing up, there was a program with Magnus Magnusson, some sort of mysteries program. I can't remember what it's called now. I was fascinated by that. And as we rolled into the 1980s and I was a teenager, we saw programs on the TV like Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, which was quite fascinating, where he covered topics ranging from UFOs and life after death and spirits on highways or haunted highways, anything like that. That was really sort of fascinating stuff to me. And from that, I learned about the the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain in London. I found out about it through that particular program. So I ventured there when I was about 16 or 17 with a few friends and had a psychic reading, which was the first time. And I was just there was no stopping me after that. I was just fascinated with the topic. Conventional religion didn't answer my questions, just didn't hold any sway for me. So I was more sort of propelled to go in this direction because there was people, just ordinary people, having really interesting encounters with things. And I thought that's perhaps going to answer some of my questions about things. And so I've just kept unraveling the string, and I still am today, unraveling this mysterious string. And obviously now we got scientists and physicists talking about superstring theory and stuff like that. So yes, it parallels quite nicely, I think.
Yeah, definitely does. So that's what got you sorry, so that's what got you started in paranormal then, as a child, asking your mom where you came from. That's really, did you have any experiences as a child then, Neil, apart from having that interest? Did you experience any?
No, I would say no. I'm not one of these people that saw spirits or anything like that. I never heard any voices. There was no one standing in the doorway beckoning me or anything like that. The only thing I can say that once happened, but I'm quite happy to accept it was possibly a dream, was when I was really young. I was probably about 3 years old, and I shared a bedroom with my two brothers, and we lived in this block of flats somewhere in Buckinghamshire. And I remember us waking up, and we saw what was like a small white sideboard rattling its way down the bedroom towards us. And it was almost like sort of scraping along the floor as it came towards us. And my brothers and I freaked out, as you would do. Yeah. And we all put our blankets over our head to hide from it. I remember putting a blanket over my head, but my blanket was more of a woolen blanket, so I could see through the bloody thing. I could still see this thing coming towards me, and it just freaked me out. And that was it. I just remember falling asleep. So I don't know really what happened, and I don't know whether it was a dream or if it was a real occurrence. And my brother said they don't remember the incident, so this is why I wonder if it was a dream. But so I can't definitely say that was a paranormal experience, but it was certainly something that frightened the hell out of me. But most experience I've had since then have never really frightened me. They've actually proved very, very fascinating and interesting.
Yeah. So obviously we know that the paranormal is a wide field. It's not just about ghost hunting. It's not just about, and I'm going to, and I don't want to offend anybody. I hope I don't offend you, but I call them Desmonds because it's not just about ghosts and Desmonds. There's actually more to the paranormal that I think a lot of people don't see that, because we have got the elemental side within the paranormal. We have got the UFO within the paranormal. We've also got other avenues that you can sort of like bring into paranormal as well, because they're unexplainable. So what would you say would be your main interest? Your main interest is like say, I don't know, early 20s to your main interest to where you are now. How has it differed over the years to where your main interest got you to where you are now?
I would say I was very, very interested in the field of UFOs through my teens, and I was always finding books at the library with UFOs and looking at the pictures of them and sort of wondering if they came from outer space or wherever they came from. Fascinated with accounts of those. But equally, I was also fascinated with what a lot of people might call spiritualism. And as I said before, I was never fascinated with religion. And I don't really like the idea of going into a church myself, but that was the only place I could, at that time, understand where you could see a medium, someone who could allegedly communicate with a departed soul or spirit. I just didn't like all the hymn singing and stuff that went with it. You know, I could quite happily dispense with that. And obviously, you can go now to demonstrations of mediums without all that kind of stuff. So I was quite happy to sit in both camps. And then later on, some years later, in the sort of early 2000s, I co-wrote and authored a book called Fairycraft about working with the fairy kingdom.
Yeah.
And I was mainly the illustrator on it, but I learned a lot through it. And so I started to do a lot of research into the sightings of the Fae, as they're commonly called. Very, very fascinating encounters of people that are, you know, not trying to claim that they've seen UFOs or ghosts, but they're claiming what appears to be even wilder claims of seeing some very, very strange things, you know, small beings, creatures that are not commonly regarded as humans, but they seem to have human attributes to them. And so for the last sort of 25 years or so, that's also been an equally fascinating area to explore, because I think that once you start looking at UFOs, ghosts and spirits in the Fae, you try and stitch it all together and you're thinking, well, how was this, or is this somehow all connected? You know, a lot of people like to put them all in separate boxes, but it's like, you know, as we're artists here, we go into a gallery and you see different paintings around the wall. And so when you go into an art gallery, you experience all those paintings at once, and then you have a little focus on one picture, then you move on to another picture. But somehow all those pictures are connected in some way. You know, they might all be done by the same artist, or certainly by a profession of artists like the pre-Raphaelites or something like that. So I think with the whole field of UFOs, spirits, ghosts, fairies, that kind of stuff, they are interconnected in some way. And at the moment, we're getting our hands on the key of this door, of this new frontier, this new reality. We just haven't quite opened the door to fully understand it yet. But we're starting to see light come through the keyhole and under the doorway, so to speak.
Yeah. Totally agree. We had some friends, they were called Elemental Encounters over on YouTube. And Andy and Becky was, they worked with the Fae. Andy had sort of like, we got some really good experiences and captures, and they actually worked really well with the elemental side. And what people on the paranormal, when they went in to do, you know, like if they got called in to do a house investigation or they went somewhere, what somebody would call like poltergeist activities, Andy would be, it's an house brownie. Do you know? So I found it really fascinating when we talk. I could listen to Andy all night, because I'd be like, okay, then what's this? Then what's this mean? I just find these. I've got such a fascination for the elemental side in with the ghost side, because I do feel like you that there is a stronger connection. But I think people see, when we talk about elementals and you mention a fairy or a gnome, people do really think of like Tinkerbell or a Disney. And actually, when you actually see a fairy, they're not pretty little things. Do you know, they've got a bite to them, some of them. And I think that persona that TV sort of made of it has an effect on how people believe in it also. Same with ghosts as well. Do you know, kind of thing? It's sort of like they make it non-believe. They sort of like try to stop people from believing, if I make sense. So yeah, Lana, Paul, have you got any questions?
Yeah. Sorry, you go first, Lana, because you actually invited Neil. So I think you should go first. Absolutely.
No, all I was going to say was, how would you, Neil, because it's an area that I haven't really looked at too much, fairies. How would you categorize them? Are they categorized, or is there a broad range of different kinds of fairies?
Interesting. Yeah. Really, it's like trying to categorize. You know, it's a broad spectrum. So really, I don't think we've kind of found the end of the string, as it were, to sort of say, oh, it's this, because it could go beyond what we're receiving. But people have tried to categorize them, and they talk about different types of fairy beings, like the sylphs of the air, which are the typical ones with might be described as having wings, like your Tinkerbells, as we talked about earlier. And that's not to say they do have wings. I think that could be artistic interpretation on that, in the same way that angels are given wings because they think, well, if someone's fly, they've got to have birds like wings. Wings like birds, sorry, to be able to, go through the air. But there's certain things like levitation and things like that where these things can seem to defy gravity. So there's wing sylphs of the air is the typical naming of them, but I'm not sure if that's the correct way of putting it. And then there's the earth elementals like gnomes, and we talk about brownies and things, and they're associated with the earth elements in some way. And then there's also ones associated with the water. So there's like water sylphs and river kind of fairies, and then there's fire ones associated with fire as well. I mean, some people describe seeing fairies like their electricity, which is an interesting description. So, I mean, they're the ones that people have tried to sort of put in a box as such. But I think there's a whole host of things that go beyond that. I mean, for instance, we spoke about these fairies not being pretty. When I was at the Probe conference a number of years ago, I'm actually due to speak at the next Probe conference on May the 22nd this year, which is at Lytham St Anne's. So I'll give them a plug. Lytham St Anne's near Blackpool, the Probe International Conference. So I'll be speaking there. But basically, I did a talk there about 5 years ago, and I spoke about centaur beings, and this lady came up to me and she said, "I'm so glad you mentioned those because I thought I was going crazy." And I said, "Well, what do you mean then?" She says, "Well, she had unfortunately lost her baby. It was stillborn, and they'd put her in this little private room in the hospital with the deceased baby in a cot at the end of the bed. And she said she sat on the bed with her head in her hands, just crying her heart out, thinking, how can I be strong for my family when I've just given birth to a dead baby here? I just can't be strong." And she said suddenly the door flung open, and in March, trotted or whatever you want to call it, 4 or 5, maybe 6, I'm not sure the exact number. And she described them centaurs, mini centaurs, about so big, and she said they weren't pretty or beautiful. They were really ugly looking. And she said they had like almost a humanoid top half, but the lower section was almost like I presume something like a horse or some sort of 4-legged beast of something like that. And she said 2 of them looked in the cot of the baby, and 2 of them stared up at her while she had her head in her hands, and was like, she was just totally bewildered. And she said what happened was some weird transformation. Instead of being really down and depressed, somehow she felt then really strengthened or healed or uplifted in some way. In other words, the presence of these beings gave her some strength to carry on. Now, she didn't say that they all went off or they vanished. She didn't kind of finish that story, so I don't quite know how it finished in that sense. But certainly, whatever it was gave her a positive uplift as such. And they certainly weren't the classical beautiful fairies, and they don't certainly fit in a box that we think of, Tinkerbell or gnomes or anything like that. They seem to fall into almost a mythical creature of some sort of thing.
So where would imps come into that? Would the imps be classed as a fairy or an evil kind of spirit rather than a fairy?
Get good and bad.
I think, you're right. You could probably get good and bad. I mean, it's the same with alien encounters. Get good and bad aliens, supposedly. But so I think it might be largely to do with the personality that's encountering them as well. The imps or fairies or whatever may be attracted to a certain type of person for whatever reason. I mean, there's a story in a really, really interesting film that your listeners and viewers might be able to find on the internet. It's called The Fairy Faith by a filmmaker called John Walker. And in this particular story, there was this woman in Canada, and what happened in the film, they took her back to the place of where this sighting occurred many, many years later with her daughter who was now grown up. But she said back in, I think it must have been somewhere in the mid-70s, she would take her children to this picnic spot on the shoreline of this big lake, and she would have a picnic with them, and then she'd take the little kids to paddle gently around the lake. And she said suddenly this woman heard this weird singing, this chanting or something, and she couldn't fathom where it was coming from. But she instinctively felt really on edge about it. She liked the feeling of this music. So she decided that the best thing to do was to get out of there. And she said to her kids, let's get in the car. And the kids couldn't understand why they had to leave the lake and get in the car. And they started moaning about it. We want to stay here, kind of thing. And she said she lost her rag a little bit with them, says, get in the car, and she threw all her kids in the car and started to drive away. Now, the eldest one, who was now grown up in this film, she said to her, don't look out the window. And then they started to drive away. But the eldest girl, she said she looked out the window because she was told not to look. So she did look. And she said she saw coming down this pathway small beings all hand in hand, like doing a dance and singing the song that they had heard. And they were coming to the area where they previously were, where they'd had their picnic. And luckily they drove away in time. Now, had they stayed there, we don't really know what would have happened, whether there was good intent or bad intent. But the mother had a sort of instinctual feeling of, I've got to get out of there. And that was that. Now, it's interesting to mention this singing because there's lots of associations with fairy realms and singing and tunes, and people don't quite place where it's coming from. But it kind of leads people off the beaten path. They're trying to find the source of this music, and that's where an encounter tends to happen once they start hearing this weird, strange music.
Yeah. You get lost in it, don't you? Like sorry.
One of the questions I was going to ask is that I know when you were talking about going to the Spiritualist Church for a while, you were doing readings, and one of the real fascinating stories, because I've seen some of your videos and I've loved it, and I can see why people say tell us a story when you're like at a campsite and by a campfire, but that you actually saw during a reading a gnome. I find that a fascinating story, so if you could retell it. But what I'd like to know is, how did this gnome look to you during the reading?
Oh, I think you were referring to once when I was doing a reading on a gentleman, and it was no intention to try and tune into this gnome, but as I was chatting to him, I suppose you'd call it clairvoyantly. It was more of a sense of feeling it rather than seeing it. I just and it's hard to describe. I mean, if there's any clairvoyants out there, mediums, they would kind of maybe understand me. Is that somehow you feel there's something there, and you can sort of feel it's small. In the same way that one person might say they sense there's someone behind them, but they don't know who's there, but they can feel there's someone. And it was like that with this thing. And I said to the guy I was doing the reading for, I said, for some reason, I feel this small being is a gnome. And I said, I feel stupid saying it, but I feel it's a gnome. And he said, absolutely fascinating, because he said he'd been to another medium who also said that this gnome followed him around, although he couldn't see it himself. And so this gnome seemed to be attached to this guy in some way. Whether it's a positive attachment or a negative attachment, I couldn't say. I didn't feel it was bad. I didn't see it in any great detail. I just sensed it. I could sense it was a small being of some sort. And that's why I described it as almost like a gnome type of being. So, we kind of think of like little garden gnomes with long beards and things like that. I don't feel it was anything like that at all, really. I just sensed it was a small being. But I couldn't clearly see it. I'm one of those people that doesn't really see things, but I sense things a lot. And sometimes I get a feeling about a lot of things. I've got to say, I've never seen a ghost, what I think is a ghost or anything like that. I always sense these things, and I can feel things come into me. And sometimes they send a shiver through my spine as I feel them enter my aura, if you like, as I start to relay information for someone. But other people will clearly see, oh yeah, there's a person standing right next to you, and describes them, whatever. With me, I get a sense of someone, of how they might have been in life, large, small, tall, whatever it is, how they might have passed over, things like that. And with this gnome, I got nothing of that, because in a sense, it hasn't passed over. It wasn't of this realm and then went into that realm. It's always been wherever it's been, but somehow it can kind of overshadow itself into our world, if you like. And that's when sensitives or psychics or mediums can pick these things up, you see.
Yeah, definitely. So, you've mentioned the fairy faith film. Let's talk a little bit about the lady with the spirit in the cupboards.
Oh yeah. Now that was going back about 20, nearly 30 years ago now. Gosh, doesn't time fly?
It
When you're
does.
dead? So what happened was I was doing tarot card readings, and oddly enough, last night I went to this psychic developing circle around this area, and the medium in charge was handing out tarot cards, and we had to try and tune into them. And I held it, but I never looked at this tarot card. I just held it, and I just stared at the floor, and I just got lost in the patterns on the floor. And I was doing a floor reading as such, because I was taking the wooden patterns on the floorboards, and just like spacing out on those. I never looked at the card at all. And when I did tarot card readings back then, I think I was kind of edged into mediumship, and I was using them as a launch pad, but I didn't realize it at the time. So I'd look at the cards, but I'd start to pick up other stuff as well. So what happened on this particular occasion? This lady phoned up, and she was an elderly lady, and she says, "I can't drive. Would you come and do me a tarot card at my house?" And so I said, "Oh, okay then." I didn't really want to, but I did, and I'm kind of glad I did. So I went there, and she lived in a very small bungalow, and she lived there by herself. So I did this reading for her. It lasted about 50 minutes, something like that. And she said at the end of it, she goes, "Oh, that's very accurate." But she goes, "But there's one thing you didn't tell me." And I said, "Well, what's that?" And she said, "Well, you never mentioned my husband." And I said, "Has he passed on?" And she says, "Yes." And I said, "Well, look," I said, "if I felt your husband around, I definitely would have said it, but I haven't felt him around here." And she goes, "Well, it's interesting you mention that." And she goes, "And I told my doctor this, and he just laughed at me." And she said, "My husband was ill in this bed." And she showed the bedroom. She says, right by the bed, there was an oxygen tank with a mask, and he had to breathe that every day just to kind of try and keep alive. And she says that every day she'd also puff up his pillows to try and make him more comfortable. And she said, when she was puffing up his pillows one day, he just leant forward and he said, "I'm in so much pain and agony. I just want to die." He was obviously tormented by the absolute pain that this poor guy was suffering. And he says, "I just want to die. I just want to die." And she said, as soon as he said that, he just literally slumped and died in her arms. And she laid him back down. And then this is where it gets really weird. She said she saw this mist coming out of his chest, rising up, and it went over into the corner of the room to the airing cupboard where her airing cupboard was. And then she says 6 months later, and she had to tell someone this. And so she told her GP because she didn't know who to talk to. And her doctor, unfortunately, just laughed at her. But she goes, "I know you won't laugh at me." She goes, 6 months later, coming out the cupboard, the airing cupboard, I saw, and this was her words back in the early 90s, I saw a red Indian. Now we call them Native American or First Nations people or something like that we call them now. But Red Indian was the word that she used because that's the era she came from. Because I saw a Red Indian coming out the cupboard. And she says he was doing this, like a clawing or scraping kind of thing, trying to come out the cupboard. But she could only see him from the chest upwards. And she said she could see all the feathers of his headdress thing. She could see the wall paint. She said even a bone necklace around his neck she could see.
Wow.
And he's doing this, she says, trying to come out of the cupboard. And she says behind him, she says she saw a man who appeared to be in the shadows. And then she saw what she thought a third man behind that man. And that third man appeared to have like a hat on of some sort. But she says she could very clearly see this Red Indian or Native American Indian coming out of the cupboard. But it wasn't just once. She said it was happening virtually every night she was seeing it. She was waking and seeing this Indian coming out of the cupboard. And so she told her GP laughed at her, and she says, "I don't know what's going on." So I said to her, I said, "Well, I bet your husband didn't believe in any of this kind of stuff, did he?" And she goes, "No, he thought it was all rubbish." And I said, "Well, that's probably part of the key." I said, "The fact is, I think that what you saw coming out of your husband's body the day he died, the mist, as you described it, was possibly his spirit or his soul." I said, "It's been taken into that cupboard." And I said, "And that cupboard is like a revolving door in a hotel lobby. You can go through it and you can come out of it." And I said, "I think they're trying to bring your husband back." And I went into the whole background about what spirit guides were. And I explained that the Native Americans were more spiritually advanced race of people than us average people here. So they were much more in tune with cycles of nature and much more in harmony with it, so that when they passed over themselves, they would have much more of an understanding of what's going on, because they were very spiritual people anyway. And so they became the teachers, so that when ordinary folk like us go over, they can then say, okay, we know you're a bit lost, we're going to help you, kind of thing. And so what I suspected was happening in the case of this lady and her husband, that the husband perhaps wanted to come back and communicate with his wife, but he didn't know how to do it. So this Native American must have said, I'll bring you back, and tried to come through the cupboard, which I think was acting as a portal.
Wow.
And if you think about the seance cabinet in demonstrations of mediumship, in physical mediumship, the medium will often sit in what they call a trance cabinet, and that's literally like a cupboard. And they might have a cloth or a canvas in front of it, and they'll sit inside it. Often they're taped up to try and demonstrate they're not doing anything fraudulent, and they might have their mouth taped up as well, so that it's not them doing the voices or something. And in the semi-darkness of the room, if it's the right type of mediumship, which is called physical mediumship, ectoplasm, which is this mysterious substance, apparently we all have it, but it only seems to manifest itself in seances, physical seances. It will come out of the medium, sometimes out of their nostrils or out their mouth or out their ears or even out their eyes, and it will come out and solidify into a form, a temporary form, for a spirit to inhabit that form, rather like an astronaut getting into a spacesuit, that then it can walk around on another planet. And it can go around that planet for an hour or two. It runs out of air. And it's literally almost like a temporary suit for the spirit to wear. And it can walk around such people and hold people and converse with them. And it'll be an absolute facsimile of what they used to look like on Earth. And then after a while, the energy will dissipate and it'll dissolve into the floor or something and go away. So I think that what happened in this particular case, this lady was very mediumistic, but she didn't realize it herself. And so she was seeing perhaps a projection of her husband coming through this cupboard, rather like in a seance cabinet. And this cupboard was almost like a seance cabinet itself, where it could use the energies. Because what happens in a seance cabinet is that the four walls of this seance cabinet, once the blind or the cover is pulled down on it, it's rather like an oven. You have to kind of keep the temperature correct. If you're going to bake a cake, you pour the liquid mixture into the cake tin, and then you switch the oven on. Now, if you left the oven door open, all that heat will escape, and the cake will never become a cake. It'll just stay liquid because the temperature hasn't been kept. You've got to shut that door, keep that thermal energy rising to the right temperature for the right amount of time, and then a chemical change will take place, and the cake will become what you can eat as an edible piece of cake. And I think it's the same sort of thing with a spiritual or physical seance. The energy has to be maintained in these four walls of this cabinet, and then it will solidify and build up, and then it will be someone will be able to walk out of it. And the energy bounces around in there, you see, I think, and then becomes solid. And I think what happens is in the airing cupboard sort of thing, it's a similar thing. It's like bouncing around that energy, and then eventually something can step through it, even if it's just a temporary there for a few minutes, a few seconds or something, to say hello, it's your husband or whatever, before it has to go back out again. And there's lots of sightings when people say, oh, I saw my dad, he's a spirit now, blah, blah, blah. Lots of descriptions have come back in my research. They always seem to be standing in doorways or in windows, or just going past the doorway. And it seems to me that it's the framework of the doorway in our houses that acts as almost like a temporary seance cabinet, where this energy can bounce around in the door frame a little bit.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
So one of the things I'm curious to know about is that you have your thought between what a ghost is and what a spirit is. And if I understood you right, that a spirit can be about pretty much forever, but a ghost will fade over time. Am I right there? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's a good interpretation. I mean, I can talk about, for instance, Harry Martindale and the Roman ghosts of York. Now, people often confuse the two things, ghosts and spirits. And so I would say a spirit is what we all are, and we're just inhabiting our physical body. And you could probably say a ghost is something like a videotape, where you can see a pre-recorded image. If you popped it in a video cassette player or something, you just see someone of an old life they had walking around. It's not the real person. It's actually just magnetic data stored on a tape. And that, I think, is similar to what a ghost is. So Harry Martindale was a plumber, in 1950, working on, I think it's the Chancellor's House on the outskirts of York. And it was being renovated by English Heritage. And basically, they were putting in new plumbing, new radiators and everything. And it was a 17th century Chancellor's House. But what was unknown to young Harry, he was only 17 at the time, was that this Chancellor's House was built on an old Roman road, because York was an old Roman city. And obviously, they had roads going out of the city in different directions and things. And Harry was sent down to the depths of this building, and he was in the basement, drilling holes, I believe. And he found a trench that had been dug by archaeologists maybe a few months before, and that's where they discovered this Roman road. Now, Harry didn't know that it was an old Roman road there. He just thought, oh, that's a handy place to put his ladder, to support his ladder, so he could climb up it. It would wedge it quite nicely against the wall and be quite secure. So he'd spent like the first part of the day drilling these holes into this wall, and toward the end of the day, he started to hear a strange sound. It's like one particular note, and he thought initially that it was the radio from up the stairs in the hallway somewhere. And he thought, oh, that's a bloody awful record playing on the radio. It's just one note. It sounds really boring. And it kept getting louder and louder and louder. And eventually it got so loud that suddenly he saw below him, because he's about 8 or 9 feet off the ground, remember, in the corner of this kind of basement or cellar, he suddenly saw a Roman centurion on a horse come straight below him, below his ladder, walk through the wall. And he was so scared out of his wits that, it shocked him, and he fell off his ladder and fell into the corner of the room. And as he sat there, he tried to hide from this Roman soldier, but more of them kept coming through the room. Now, he described them as they totally ignored him. They didn't see him at all. And yet he was frightened because he thought they'd spot him, but he seemed to be invisible to them. And he said that they were unshaven, they were covered in mud. They weren't your typical Charlton Heston Roman soldiers wearing red tunics. These ones were wearing green tunics, and they had, I believe it was round shields and small daggers. And it didn't quite fit in with the typical Roman soldiers that we see in historical books or films. The colours didn't match, the shields didn't match, the daggers didn't match, but still they had a Roman look about them. And this is how he described them as his eyewitness sighting. And he said he saw about 15 or 16 of these Roman soldiers, some on horses, some not, covered in mud, unshaven. And he said he could even hear them talking in a language he didn't understand. And they came through. But as they reached the part where the trench had been dug through to the Roman road, did he then see the legs appear? And they carried on, and they walked straight past them. And one of the last people to come through the wall was a Roman carrying a great big horn, which was the sound he had heard initially, blowing it. And I believe that was to announce to the Roman garrison back in York that they were now approaching the city and to open the gates. And so what I think Harry saw there was like a recording, if you like. Some people call it a recording. I do have another theory on that. You might want to call it a recording in time. But the theory I have on that is that actually he was peering on a window in time, because a few years later, when the house was passed under the custodian of another caretaker, who was a lady that had a couple of dogs, she would go around locking up all the doors and whatnot of this building late at night, and her dog started to bark down towards the cellar, where about 7 years earlier, Harry saw these Roman ghosts. Now, it's important that Harry saw these ghosts in the winter of about 1953, I think it's like November or something. And this lady was she saw the same Roman ghosts, but there was a slight difference, is that they were all slumped over their horses as if they were all fallen asleep, and the horses were carrying them home. They weren't awake. They were all slumped over their horses. They were still covered in mud. And she saw them about 7 years later, in about 1957 or 58, in the February. So it's still a winter month. So it's still cold and wet. So what I was wondering about that particular sighting, although they might be some people call it the stone tape theory, where you see an action repeat itself. On this particular instance, it wasn't a repeat of the same scene. It was perhaps the same character, or something to do with that era, but they were doing a different kind of day's work, if you like. And it made me wonder, because these two people, Harry Martindale and the caretaker lady, had both seen them in their winter of the 1950s, that they were then peering through time to a winter's day of, say, 2,000 years during the Roman times of ancient Britain. And hence, that's why we're seeing mud on these Roman soldiers, because during the summer, which was very warm summers, I understand, in those days, so warm, in fact, that you could go grow grapes in those regions, that it suggests that if there's mud on the ground, it would be wet, and therefore it's possibly winter. And obviously these roads that they're on are not like the roads we have today. These perhaps going through fields and things like that, where they're getting mud splattered on them, maybe from the horses' hooves as they splatter up the mud. And they're seeing the mud on both sets of Roman soldiers. So I suspect that somehow you can peer through windows in time. There's a lady I know, I run a paranormal peep show on the Paranormal UK radio network, and her name's Irene Allen. And she said that she was looking around a potential house to buy with her husband. And as they're being shown around the rooms by the estate agent, she said she went in a part where the maids used to occupy. And she said she came face to face with a maid from a previous bygone era. And the maid just looked as scared as at seeing her as she did her. They both looked at each other and went, "Oh my God." So it's almost like the maid could see Irene from the future. So to the maid in the Victorian times, Irene was the ghost, if you like. So I think that's examples of
like a time slip.
Not recorded, not spirits, literally, like a time slip. Your typical kind of science fiction peering through the veils of time kind of idea, which is interesting. So again, you can't always categorize these things into that's a ghost, that's a spirit, there's other activity and phenomena that we're starting to explore, and maybe it ties up with string theory or physics or something like that. I don't know, but it's very interesting where these things can take you.
I know and then I know that I've only heard it from one person, but they did say in medieval times there are reports of flying crosses in the sky. So he's wondering if UFOs we see are like flying craft of our future. I don't know if you've heard that, Neil, because I've only ever heard it through this one person. But if you've heard like medieval times flying crosses in the sky.
Yeah, I have heard things like that. I mean, also there's many things like in the Bible. They talk of descriptions of strange things like wheels, fiery chariots, and shields, and things like that. They describe it according to their own times of what they're in. So there's a sighting of a UFO about 35, 40 years ago now. This guy in Brazil, who was a youngster at the time, and he was just a little farm boy. He had not really ventured much outside his village, so he wasn't really up with the modern world. And he described what he saw, and he described it the best way he could as a horseless tractor or something like that was on the ground. And in fact, it was actually what he described. It sounded like a landed craft of some sort. But he had to phrase it in terminology that he could relate to. So when someone says, "Oh, they see a cross in the sky," it could very well be the shape of a cross. Sometimes these crafts seem to appear to be changing shape. Now, I read in a book some years ago is that they're not necessarily from outer space. These UFOs, they could be coming from other dimensions. And what's happening as it comes from one dimension to another? There's what they call root assumptions in each reality. So, for instance, root assumption we have here, a belief that we all have, is of gravity. So if we jump up, we all believe that we'll come down again, you see. Now, there's certain people, mystics, sages, mediums, that seem to have overcome that somehow, and they can actually levitate. I won't go into that just yet. But the root assumption here that we all kind of tend to agree on that there's this thing called gravity. But in other realities, gravity may not exist as a root assumption or root belief of that field of activity as such. So therefore, as it comes from one reality, it's one particular shape according to the rules and designation of where it's come from. But as it tries to traverse into our world, a distortion takes place, and it tries to then obey the rules of our reality. And so therefore it appears to be one shape, then another shape, and another shape. And it's trying to obey both rules of both realities at the same time until maybe it fully manifests in our world. Then it does take a shape. But the shape that we're seeing it in this world may not be its true shape anyway. there could be a distortion that we're seeing in our universe. In fact, the whole world is a distortion, so I've read anyway. And so therefore, when we try and measure it and identify it and things like that, our own devices that we're using are distortions of themselves anyway. They're not the real true reality of what we're trying to measure with. So we're trying to measure the curved world of the weird world with curved rulers anyway. We're not going to come up with an absolute of whatever it may be. I mean, there's things that these craft have been put in secret bases and hangs and things like that. We don't know the truth of that. I mean, there's people that say they've seen them. But I sometimes wonder if that's just fed us to make us think in a certain way of thinking, that you think, oh, they're from definitely out of space, because maybe the powers that be don't want us to really know the true nature of these things, i.e. that these things can traverse into our world from just other dimensions or whatever it may be, in the same way that spirits can. You know, you can tell people, oh yeah, we can shoot these things down because we can see them coming past them, so we can shoot them down. But when these things are stepping out and stepping out walls and things like that, that's a bit harder to shoot down, I think, you see. So I think we're fed a few stories to make us think in a certain way.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Good.
Definitely. So what I've lost my train of thought. Going back onto coming into UFOs and aliens and stuff. What convinced you? I mean, I obviously the universe for me is too big. We have got different dimensions out there and everything intermixes. But what point, Neil, that got you that you were thought, right, this can be go on, try I'm thinking of my words. That
Plausible.
Yeah, that it were plausible. Yeah.
So what made me think that the world of spirits, ghosts, and stuff is a plausible idea? You mean? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
UFOs, wasn't it?
UFOs. Yeah.
UFOs in particular, plausible. Well, I suppose when I started to see the photographs of what ordinary people had taken, that you started to see, you know, strange shapes and in people's photos, and going back to as a kid, you know, before we had computers and Photoshop and things like that, you know, these were just sometimes ordinary farmers just seeing something and they happen to have a camera in their car and they pick it up, you know, and they took a picture, and you know, they might have managed to fire off 3 or 4 shots on their film. And then these films are analyzed, and you know, whoever analyzes it says that, well, whatever that is definitely there. There's no wires. You know, the trajectory seems to be following a certain path and that kind of thing. Yeah, it's and also there's so many accounts from around the world of people seeing these things.
Why do you think that they've seen them though in similar locations? So you know, it's like Skinwalker Ranch, I think it is, over in America. UFOs are drawn to that. I mean, when I was watching not history. There was something on telling it were all to do with Skinwalker Ranch and what was underneath. They weren't allowed to dig, and there's something metallic, metal or something under the earth. Why do you think that they're drawn to certain locations and that they're not drawn to everywhere? Do you know? There's more sightings in more places than others.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to go back to the portals idea. We have to go back to the spirit coming out of the cupboard idea that, you know, that spirit could manifest in that cupboard fairly easily with the right conditions. And from what I've read anyway, books, there's a book called Seth Speaks by a medium called Jane Roberts, for anyone that wants to write that down. You can get it on Amazon. And basically Seth was this... for want of a better word, spirit guide, if you like. And she used to channel him or trance him, and her husband used to take down all the dictation as she spoke the words of this highly evolved spiritual being. He described himself actually as a personality essence no longer focused in the physical, which was a long-winded way of saying he's dead. But he used to talk about all these kind of things. He said there's around the world and around your physical universe, there's coordination points. He said it's where there's intersections of energy, and it's where reality, there's no closed systems, he said. In other words, you know, if there's like one dimension and another dimension, it's they're all interlinked. You know, there's nothing closed. Things can traverse between them at certain points. Now, that might be certain points in time. It could be certain points in space. And it seems to me that these UFOs, according to John Keel anyway, well, there's many records of them appearing on certain days of the week, which a lot of people hadn't realized is that, and I forget which days it was now, it's more likely to be they appeared maybe on a Monday and a Thursday. Not say they didn't appear on a Saturday, but the majority of times it was a Monday and a Thursday. Now, I might be getting my days muddled, but it was something like 2 days of the week. They seem to come in a lot of sightings, and they seem to come in certain areas. And people talk about hotspots and things like that of UFOs. So it could be something to do with the magnetic flux of the Earth, perhaps. I mean, I'm just stretching things here a bit because I can't remember the points that John Gill raised in his book, but it could be that these areas might be where these portals or coordination points might be. And it could be that there's lots of spirits can manifest there. And this Skinwalker Ranch, I understand it's on a place where a lot of meteorite stuff is below the ground. Now, that might not necessarily be the cause of it, but it could be that the meteorite was pulled down into that area because of it's a coordination point. So it's not necessarily the meteorite is the cause of the phenomenon. It just happens to be part of the trash of the problem, you see. So these UFOs can appear all over the place, but generally they seem to follow certain pathways, and it's when they appear to vanish just like that. It's not necessarily them flying up the speed. It's them literally just switching off and going out of our reality, out of our range of perception.
What did you think about Rendlesham Forest, Neil? The story about that, surrounding that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very controversial story, hasn't it? I mean, it's been going around for about 40 odd years now. So the idea is that around the Christmas nights of December 1980, I believe it was, that this reports of landed craft appeared just outside east of Woodbridge or whichever. There was two American Air Force bases right next to each other. I always wonder why they made two American bases next to each other. Why don't they just make it a big one? So there we go. That's politics for you. So yeah, it was the Rendlesham Forest was the surrounding forest of these two bases, and this landed craft allegedly appeared, and it was cited by Burroughs and Jim Penniston, and he took notes of what it was, and then it returned like a few days later with Lieutenant Colonel Charles Hall was the guy that led the team that went out into the woods to try and see further things, and they saw laser beams hit the ground and stars flying all over the place or something like that. A lot of it was blamed on the nearby lighthouse, which apparently it wasn't. It was nothing to do with the lighthouse at all. Now, Richard D. Hall, a researcher on Rich Planet TV or richplanet.net for anyone, he's done some investigations into that, and he's done this thing called voice analysis, where they've kind of looked at that and sort of realised that, well, maybe they're trying to cover up something there. They've put out a UFO story, but it could be something to do with more nuclear weapons, say, that they've probably had an issue with, and so to try and cover that story, they put out a further cover story, because the Rendlesham story's got a lot of publicity, and it's been discussed even in the House of Commons and stuff like that. And when you start discussing like that a lot, it sounds like there's an agenda you want to push out there for people to listen to. And it could be a cover story for something else that we shouldn't be knowing about. I could be wrong. It could be a real genuine UFO case, but it's just an alternative view I heard I thought was interesting.
Well, according to Penniston, didn't he receive some downloads of some sort? Or was that according to Nick Pope?
Yeah, that's what I think it was according to Penniston himself. He had received some sort of download of information, and I believed it was something to do with some basic mathematical data, which is really simple mathematics. I can't remember the whole thing about that now. But, I mean, it could be true. It could absolutely be true. I just don't know. I've heard so much about it. After a while, I kind of switch off. I start to think, well, I'm bored of that one. I want to look at other things now, you know.
Yeah.
The thing I found interesting was the coordinates that he was given. He was given certain coordinates of certain sacred places, but one of them was a place called High Brazil, which is a mythical place. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be. I think it's been in certain sort of ancient scriptures. It's been mentioned. It's just off Ireland, isn't it, in the Atlantic? But it's.
Yeah.
I think I've got to read up a little bit more on that, because why would they be given that location?
Yeah, it's not the best location to go investigate it.
No, not
I
really.
mean, you know, maybe there's something undersea there. I mean, there's lots of cases and reports of craft, you know, emerging from the sea.
Yeah.
Down the British Isles, even. There was a report, I think, of some coastal rocks. And I think it was around the Wales area, actually, one of the rocks off the coast of Wales, where this lady could see what looked like humanoid beings, and they seemed to be going down into a doorway that went into the rocks, or as if they were coming up through some sort of lift device that came out of the rocks. There's lots of suggestions that there's like unsea bases around the world, and so, you know, maybe this High Brazil could be pointing to an undersea base.
It could be.
I don't know.
And then you've got the lights at Brown's Mountain, is it? Brown Mountain is that in America? And these green lights have been seen all over the place at night.
Yeah,
have you seen that?
I've seen vaguely. I can remember seeing something on it, because they can't pinpoint where they're coming from. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this connected to the Poldin lights as well, by any chance?
I'm sure, but they're kind of green in colour, but obviously visible at night. But they seem to dance around the mountain, and it's Brown's Mountain. I'm sure that's what it's called.
I mean, it sounds like plasma discharge or something. That's what a conventional scientist might say. You know, a bit like, say, the Aurora Borealis, because they tend to be green lights as well. They can't. And in Orkney, where I used to live, they called them the merry dancers. So what you say, dancing around the mountains. These lights appear to be flashing everywhere, and that's to do with the magnetic poles of the Earth and the ionosphere and stuff.
Erratic in movement as well, so they can kind of just go straight up, or travel at a 90-degree angle or whatever.
Charles has put in North Carolina.
Oh yes, North Carolina.
There's the Hessdalen lights, I think, in Norway as well, which are kind of lights that are being seen at a certain location. They've even set up permanent cameras there to try and record them, and they're not quite sure what they are. They don't appear to be solid craft, but they appear to be some manifestation of weird lights anyway. I mean, there's a guy I know who has taken photographs above his house and above his garage in Oxfordshire, called Nick Hayes, and he's had his digital camera adapted so that it can take pictures in the infrared and also ultraviolet. And he's sort of been inspired by the work of Trevor James Constable, who took pictures using infrared film in the Mojave Desert. And when he was looking at his pictures in infrared, he was finding these strange objects in the sky that couldn't be seen with the human eye. And so Nick Hayes, Quest for the Invisibles is his website, questfortheinvisibles.com or .co.uk, covers his recording all these things. He spends hours filming them, and then he flicks through the frames of video and finds the odd strange object. Which is interestingly enough, he seems to draw them in using something called a cloud buster. So if you know the Kate Bush song Cloud Busting, she's got a great big device that aims at the clouds. Well, that was invented by someone who it was now William Wright or something like that. I can't remember the name of the guy. And I'm not quite sure if it's to create rain or draw clouds together. I can't remember the idea behind a cloud buster. But apparently these creatures or critters or whatever he wants to call them seem to be attracted to this cloud buster. And basically he's made his just out of a long tube, a discarded tube like a drain pipe, and straps them all together and just aims them at the sky. And for some reason, these weird objects want to come and look at this thing for whatever reason. And it's then that he captures these floating objects on his infrared or ultraviolet camera. He's got some very, very interesting pictures. It's worth looking at his website, Quest for the Invisible.
So you said he goes frame by frame, and do they like only appear for like one frame? When these
he could be filming, say, 2 or 3 hours at a time on his video, and he might capture maybe 2 or 3 frames of the movement of the object because it's so quick, and he's just analysing it so carefully. But sometimes he might be lucky and get quite a lot of action in one day, but he seems to have got a lot of action once he set up this cloud buster. It seems to somehow stimulate whatever is up there to come in and look at him and investigate him. It's almost like honey to a fly or something. It's really strange.
Wow.
Claire's put a question in. What do you think, Neil, about is it Decmont Woods UFO incident in Scotland? Have I pronounced Decmont right?
Now, I might be confusing my UFO cases here. So, is that the one with the Robert Taylor? I think if it's the woodsman guy, if it's a case I'm thinking of, and I apologize if I got it wrong. If it's a case that I'm thinking of, he's a guy that's like a woodsman. He looked after the land in this woods, and he was walking, sort of doing the rounds, checking the fences in these woods, and he came across like a landed craft that was in reality one minute and not there the next, and it seemed to be transparent and then fading in and out of reality. And at some point, it sent out 2 or 3 of these, what he described as, he said they looked like World War II sea mines with the spikes on, and they somehow rolled towards him. And as they rolled towards him, they kind of knocked him unconscious or something. And he woke up sometime later with torn trousers. And if it's the case, I hope I've got the case. Yes, Robert Taylor. Thank you for confirming that. Yeah, it was the actual first case that was reported to police, and they logged it as an official assault by assailants unknown. And I actually held the trousers that were in this case. I was at a UFO conference, and Malcolm Robertson, who's investigated this case and done talks on it, he was at this UFO conference, and he passed the trousers amongst the audience, and so I actually held them, and you could see the rip on them. He's now passed away, this gentleman, but you could see the tears in the trousers and everything like that. It's fascinating. And whatever they did to him, I don't know, but they certainly owe money for a new pair of trousers. But he's lucky to have got away with his life, really. He's lucky to have got away with his life, because these things sounded from the description pretty dangerous, and the fact that they came out. And it's interesting, they weren't like your typical grey aliens coming out and saying, come aboard our ship for a quick examination, These things to be more of a almost robotic in nature. And the whole thing itself might not have had any beings on board at all. It sounds like it's almost like a completely artificial intelligence that came out, did what they did, ripped his trousers. Maybe they took samples from him, I don't know, and then they faded back out of reality again. And he turned back up at home, looking disheveled, and they called the doctor. He was actually examined by the doctor, and then the police were later called, who logged it as an assault. So it's a very interesting case. 1977, if memory serves me correct. Yeah. Wow. It was suggested he'd been watching too much Doctor Who, but I don't think he watched Doctor Who.
There was also that gentleman, where was it, Hussein on EasyJet plane, the sighting in Iran. That was also another sighting.
Oh, yeah. Now, that's a very interesting case, because this is someone I met. This is back to when my son was little. He's going to be 22 soon, so he would have been about 4 at the time. So it was a number of years ago. But we were heading from Scotland to head out to Spain. And so we landed at the airport from Scotland to then catch another flight to head out to Malaga in Spain. And so we all boarded the plane, and one of the last people to get on the plane, there's lots of Spaniards getting on this plane because they're all heading back to Spain anyway. And it was an EasyJet plane. My son sat next to the window looking out. I was in this seat, and the very last seat on the plane, the last guy came on the plane, he sat next to me, and I thought he was a Spaniard because he kind of had tan skin and everything. He had those dark looks. But anyway, we got chatting, and he said that he was an architect living in London. But he said, I'm from Iran. But he said, I prefer to call it Persia by its original name, but you would know it as Iran. But he said, I live in London now. And he said he was going out to Spain to check on the properties that he was developing out there as a project. And he said, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm an artist. And at the time, I ran this fairy museum, Orkney Fairy Museum and Gallery in Scotland, off the coast of mainland Scotland in the Orkney Islands. And so I showed him on my digital camera some photographs of some of the artwork I did. So I started talking about fairies and stuff like that. And I told him some of the stories that I'd seen in this Fairy Faith film that I'd been recently watched at that time, the Fairy Faith film by John Walker. And so this guy opened up to me, you know, and had I not been speaking about this kind of stuff, he would have never ventured it. But I think he felt a little bit more confident to talk about it. And it's always the same at these conferences. So, you know, as soon as you finish your talk, all these people then line up and tell you their little personal happenings that they'd never tell anybody in the pub or whatever, you know. So this was a similar sort of case. But he said that when he was a young man, he was conscripted into the Iranian army. So I'd put this about maybe the early 1980s based upon his age at the time. And he said that he was doing a street patrol in Iran with another soldier, and it was a nighttime shift, and they were patrolling the streets at night. And he said a sandstorm kicked up, which was typical in those parts of the world. So he said to his buddy, let's go and seek shelter in this mosque. So they went into the mosque. As the custom in mosque, they have to take their shoes and socks off, and they have to go in there barefoot. So he said to his friend, you lay down and have a sleep for an hour. I'll sit next to you with the gun, and I'll keep an eye out for any trouble. So that was the arrangement. So his friend fell asleep, and this guy, I call him Hussein, he said he was sitting there with a gun, and no matter how hard he tried to stay awake, he kept nodding off to sleep. And he went, whew, and he woke up again. He goes, oh, I must stay awake, I must stay awake. And then he fell asleep again. And on the third time, he fell asleep, and he woke up, and he thought, I must stay awake. And he woke up, and he said, there was suddenly before him this woman crouching down, staring at his feet, like looking at his feet like that. And next to this woman was a girl. He put her to be about 11 or 12 years of age, staring at his buddy's feet, who was asleep. So Hussein said he got his elbow and he tried to press on his army buddy's chest with his elbow. And he said, no matter how hard I pressed, he said he wouldn't wake up. So Hussein said he decided he didn't like the feeling of this. So he said he was going to make a run for it. I don't know why, because he was the guy with the gun. It was a bit strange, isn't it? You're the soldier with the gun, and there's like a defenseless woman there and a defenseless girl, but you're going to run away from them. But this is what he said. He said he started to strap of the gun around his arm, so he said it wouldn't swing as he ran away. So I said, as he was doing that, it must have caught the eye of this woman. He said she suddenly looked from his feet and looked at him up. And he said, stared him straight in the eye. And he said, as soon as I looked at her and made eye contact with her, he said, I just knew without a doubt she was not from this world. There was some inner knowing or communication going on. I just knew that she wasn't from this world. And at that point, she stood up and the young girl with her stood up, and they turned and walked away. And he said, as they walked away, he noticed they both had cloven hooved feet. And he said they just vanished into the wall of the mosque. Wow. And when he told me that, I had a big shiver up and down my neck. Oh, my God. So I said, can I use your story in a book? And he says, yes, but please don't use my name. And that's the arrangement I've held to this day. Yeah. So it kind of gives a few insights here, because the fact that they were staring at his feet and his buddy's feet. So to them, the human feet were the oddities, because they were curious about the shape of the human foot. And it also lends credence to the legends where we've got creatures that seem to be half human and half beast. We have legends of Pan with cloven feet and things like that. So could there be some substance behind these legends, these ideas, wherever they come from? And they seem to be appearing in our reality. Hence the lady that came up to me and said, I'm so glad you told that story, which was the story I told at the Pro conference, because then she told me about the centaurs that she had seen in the hospital, you see. Because she said, thank God you said that, because I thought I was going crazy. There seemed to be a race of beings that sometimes pop into our world that have cloven hoof feet.
It's like you say, I think a lot of people are scared to talk about what they've seen because the stigma that comes with it and how other people react to it, which is really sad, really. But then I'm glad that there's people like you, Neil, there's people like Paul, there's people like Lana, that and don't get me wrong, you go on the internet and there is real true people on there that are genuinely interested, that will genuinely listen and not laugh. They take it as serious as you're telling it. But I feel sad for those that think that they can't. I feel awful for them, that they can't speak because they don't know how somebody's going to take it. So it takes you to say something for them to open up. I think it's quite sad that. Claire's put, do you think Antarctica is connected to aliens, or do you think it's just conspiracy theories?
Interesting question. Well, there's this great idea that people put around the internet that Antarctica is forbidden territory and you're not allowed to fly there. And, there's all these kind of things, you mustn't go there. And then you get these ideas of John Carpenter's The Thing with the shape-shifting alien creature that's buried in the snow, and it all kind of becomes a bit entangled in that. But in fact, you can travel to Antarctica. And I know that for a fact, because my brother went there on a holiday a few years ago, and he gave it 11 out of 10 as holidays goes, he said. And he sent me photos of WhatsApp of icebergs and things like that.
Yeah.
So he said the way you get to it, he says you fly all the way down to the very southern tip of South America, and then you charter a boat from the southern tip of South America, or is it the plane? I can't remember which way it was. And you go right to Antarctica. That's not to say you can go all over the whole of Antarctica. Now, remember, Antarctica is the bottom of the Earth, and it's as bigger than the United States. So you don't cover it in a day. So there's certain areas where you can go simply because it's safe to go. But there's obviously places that are dangerous because they haven't even explored half of it there. So there could be, there's rumors of the Nazis going there in the war, and there was rumors of that. A friend of mine, Ben Emlyn Jones, met a guy who said that just after the war, he was part of a British patrol unit that was sent down to fight Nazis down in Antarctica, and they had a secret base there. So there could be stations down there. There could be Nazi bases down there. There could even be alien bases there. But what I'm saying is, it's not off limits to the people like you just got to pay a lot of money. But I'm saying that you can't cover it all in one visit. Simply like when you go to America, you can't visit it all in one day. It's the same sort of thing. And, it's really expensive to go there. And like when you're going to America, say, there's airports in every part of the United States, But in Antarctica, because it's a real hostile territory, you're not going to find like airports every 20 miles or so. Because it's not much there to do, really. So
also, would you think
they will have research stations and weather bases and that, but it's an off limits as far as everyday Joe public going as such.
Well, it is, isn't it? When you think of scientists that come out there, they're out there. They can be out there for a year, and because where they get dropped off, it takes them 3 days to get to where they're supposed to get to, because they, like you said, there's no airport. Do you think also, I know people are saying about that no-fly zone. Maybe it's a no-fly zone because it's that cold in that spot that it could start affecting equipment on plane or on helicopters or whatever. Would that be possible?
I think so. I might be wrong here. So if there's anyone that's a pilot, maybe they can enlighten me. But I thought it could be something to do with the fact that because it's like the South Pole, it could be the magnetics of the compass or and it might be hard to navigate where you're going. So maybe that could be part of the reason of a no-fly zone. Or it could be that it's just don't fly over that because if you run out of fuel, no one's going to come and rescue you. Maybe you got to fly in certain, like in the UK skies, you have flight paths. And it could be that Antarctica got certain flight paths because they know if you're going to fly in that area and you have to come down and crash, they know roughly where to look for you. Yeah. Whereas if you go off the beaten track, they're not going to find you as much. So it's actually safer to stick to the chosen path, even though it's in the sky, technically.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes more logical sense to me.
It does make more logical sense. So do you... Go on, Paul.
Yeah, sorry. One of the things I was going to say is it was going back to what you said earlier, that there's people like Lana, myself, yourself, and Neil, that people open up to about these stories. But I find when people do open up to me about the stories, it tends to be it's about a ghost, maybe something about reincarnation or UFOs and aliens. But there are some really interesting stories you come across, like one of my favourite ones, the 50-foot woman on top of the church that I've heard you talk about.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think there's an awful lot more stories out there which isn't just the sort of UFO ghosts, just because I think people feel comfortable-ish talking about they've seen a ghost, but to say they saw a 50-foot woman sat on top of the church, they think, God, this person's round the bend. So do you think there's an awful lot more stories out there about this kind of paranormal angle than we even know about?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that, you know, when we hear these stories, that's just the people we meet. And so, you know, the masses of people on Earth that must, you know, the percentages must be high that have seen or felt and seen these things. And just to go into this 50-foot woman on the church, I'll explain that for people that are wondering what the hell that is. I used to work at this book. Yeah, you're all waiting with bated breath, I can tell. What it is that I worked at this broadcasting place a number of years ago, and there was this guy on the night shift there, a security guard, and in the evenings we'd all assemble in the kitchen to go and pick up our food and warm it up in a microwave or something. And I just overheard him talking to this girl. All I heard him say was the words, "She was white as that fridge freezer there," which was in the kitchen. And my ears pricked up and thought, oh, this sounds spooky. I'm going to butt into this conversation. And because I knew the security guard anyway a little bit, I felt it was the right to do so. I said, what are you talking about, Owen? And he goes, this woman I saw. I said, well, what happened? He says, well, when I lived in the St. Lucia, one of these Caribbean islands, I forget which one it was. I say St. Lucia, but I don't know that area very well. I've never been there. But that's where he originally came from. And he said that he used to, you know, frequent the bars with his buddy and things like that. And he said that one time he was coming out of the bar with his buddy, and I'll talk about alcohol in a minute because people always put it down to alcohol, but it's not alcohol. I know this to be a fact. I'm pretty sure of that. Is that he came out of the bar, they're walking back to their respective houses down this little road. And as they walked past, they would always go past this church that was up on the hill. But on this roof, and they came round the corner and there was a church. But it wasn't the normal church. It was the normal church, but sitting on the church was this great big, tall, 50-foot-ish high woman straddling this church like you'd sit on a doll's house. And it was white as the fridge freezer, he described. Long white hair, pale white face, white kind of robes, if you like. And she's sitting on the church roof. And I always say this proves one inescapable fact of truth. This is why they're always trying to raise money for church roofs, because you're always getting 50-foot women giants sitting on them. But what happened was, that was interesting. His friend that was with him cowered behind a gravestone in absolute fear, and he hid behind the gravestone. So Owen said to him, "Can you see this too?" Because he wanted to validate what he was seeing was true, and he said, "Yes, I can see it." So he was seeing this 50-foot woman, I believe, as well, which rules out the idea of hallucinations of alcohol. And in fact, alcohol, the idea of people hallucinating on alcohol is not really true. Apparently, they used to put magic mushrooms in alcohol in the medieval times, but it was banned by some king many, many centuries ago. So alcohols we have it there is very different from the alcohol of centuries ago when they used to put magic mushrooms in it. Hence, you might have hallucinated things on alcohol then, and that's where these stories linger from, I think. But anyway, he said that he could see this woman. Owen, the security guard, could see this woman. Now he was a bit braver. He had to pick up a rock and he threw it as hard he could at this 50-foot tall woman sitting on the church roof. And I said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "It went straight through her." And I said, "And what happened then?" He said, "Well, she stood up," which is not a good idea to lob rocks at 50-foot women on roofs. I don't think they take kindly to it. But she stood up, stepped off the church, and started to walk towards them. But as she did so, fortunately for them, she started to shrink in size until she became the size of a normal person and then just disappeared into the floor. And that was it. She was gone. And this is the interesting thing. He says, "But I don't believe in ghosts and ghoulies and things that go bump in the night." And it was almost like he was in denial of it, and yet he had seen it, but he didn't want you to confirm it. You know, it's a really strange one. Really strange.
lots of people like that, though, isn't there? That see things but don't want it confirmed that what they've seen and everything else. Yeah, my mom's one of them. She's don't believe, but I've seen this and I've got that, but I don't believe. Yeah.
Good thing is, though, Neil, because you're writing these stories and you're publishing them, it's encouraging other people to come forward with more stories that they wouldn't ordinarily speak to people about.
Yeah, I'm thinking of opening up my own little confession booth. A bit like a Catholic confession booth. People can sit the idea of through a little net in or something and tell me their weird stories. Confess. What have you seen sitting on the church roof this week?
Can you imagine that? Oh my goodness! More TV. Right, good. Oh dear. So sticking to topic of aliens at the minute. Is it true aliens could be fairies? Is there a connection to Aries, fairies and aliens, do you think?
There has been some connections made by certain UFO authors. I'm trying to think of the guy's name, but he's French and his name escapes me. So if anyone knows that, please type it in the chat box. But he made a connection of it. He was basically sort of saying that, with fairies, you get taken away. You get taken away for some time. I mean, in the case of fairy abductions, it could be you appear to be gone on Earth time for many years, but in a time when you're with the fairies, it may be only a matter of moments. But when you come back to your world, reality of Earth, say, it could be like 2 or 3 years have passed. And so you have a kind of missing time thing. And in alien abduction scenarios, there's this missing time. Typically, you might be gone for maybe a few hours or something. When you check watch, you're thinking, hang on, it's not 8 o'clock at night, it's like 10:01 in the morning. Where have I been? As in the case of Betty and Barney Hill, who found they had 4 hours missing from their time when they were driving down from Canada back into the northern United States back in 1961. And I think one of the longest cases of someone missing was about 5 days, and that was the Fire in the Sky case, where fascinating. That's the forget the guy's name now, but Travis Walton. Thank you.
That's it. Yeah.
Travis Walton, that's right, who was a logger out in, I think it was Arizona somewhere in the mid-70s. And they encountered a UFO hovering in the woods. And so he ran out to investigate. They encouraged him to come back to the vehicle, and it fired some sort of beam, and they thought it had killed him. So they drove away. And when they had the bravery to return, they came back and found that he had gone missing, but so had the UFO. And so they had reported him missing to the local sheriff, and they all went on lie detector tests. And basically, they were suspected of killing him and hiding his body or something. But he then turned up 5 days later, all bewildered. And
miles away,
I'm not sure if he remembered. Yeah. I'm not sure if he remembered his whole thing or if it came back through hypnosis. I can't remember now. But he said he found himself inside a craft. Yeah. But again, that's a similar scenario. A lot of these cases with fairies, they say they're small beings, and they say a lot of these aliens are small beings. So there are parallels to it. And John Keel, the author who wrote the Mothman prophecies, he's looked into the whole thing of UFOs, and he doesn't believe necessarily they come from outer space. He thinks that's the story that we're fed by these visitors. He suspects they're coming from some other reality that perhaps these fairies and ghosts and things come from, and it's not necessarily all the same kind of joint as such they're coming from, but different variations of this levels of these realities. And so I mean, there's one case where this person that was taken aboard this craft or something, she says, "Where do you come from?" And they didn't say, "Oh, we come from planet X" or anything. They said, "We come from a place that you don't know about yet." Now, if you're, they could have easily said a planet or something. And when they have said we come from certain planets, we come from this planet, that planet, wherever, when they've actually looked up these planets, in fact, it turns out these planets are actually types of herbs and plants and things like that. So it's like they're making up stories. There's a lot of these strange visitors. They're not quite being truthful with who they are. And they take a lot of stuff from us, but they don't give us much back. So they'll take eggs and sperm and all that kind of stuff for your samples, blood and whatnot, but they don't give much in the way of return.
Yeah.
So
maybe because we've
it's not all love and light.
No.
Yeah.
No. But that could also link into, because if these are the elemental, the phase, humans have bitten them in past, they've hurt them in the past, so they've got no trust with the humans. So when they're coming out, and like you said, they're all taking at the minute, they're not giving. Maybe that's because of what happened years ago. Do you know, when you look back and you see how they were treated by humans back then. But Anne's put, there's a saying, out with the fairies. But I find that theory, I quite like that. I've never looked at it that way, of actually aliens being of elemental beings, because what a great way for them to set a trap, to have something hovering in the sky or hovering above ground, and that's like their trap net. But then obviously because Travis was found miles away from his home, on Earth, stripped naked, back to like a newborn baby would be. And to me, there's a very earthy connection with that being coming, with no clothes. Do you know what I mean? It's like, so yeah, I like that. I kind of like that theory. I prefer that one to aliens in sky, to the UFOs. I do think there's things in universe that we can't explain, but that's gonna be my my go-to, because I like that theory. I don't like the sky theory. For me, it spooks me a little bit, being beamed aboard, whereas though being sucked into Earth, I think I'd I'd like that way better. I don't fear it as much, if that makes sense.
I think I'd pass on both, though.
Claire's put, haven't aliens implants usually been found under people's skin that has been removed by surgeons? Implants, but it's been found.
Yeah, there's been numbers of reports of things under people's skin that either become too dangerous to remove or evasive. There was one documentary film I saw maybe 6 months ago on YouTube or Amazon Prime. I can't remember where I saw it now. And it's this surgeon who was actually, providing a service to people, saying, "I'll remove your alien implants for you." And they would go to him and he would scan them and x-ray them and see these small metallic fragments. Now, whether they were really, put there by aliens, I can't say. But he was removing these objects and taking them under the microscope. Now, during the actual making of the film, this surgeon who was doing this stuff mysteriously died of a heart attack. So it makes you wonder, is people like him drawing too much attention to something that we shouldn't know about?
We shouldn't be, that we should, knowledge that we're not ready for. That I do find that interesting. Is everybody okay for time?
I'm okay.
I've got to probably get to bed soon because I've got an early start in the morning. So, I've got a long drive.
Is there anything before? I mean, we're coming up to an hour and a half anyway. Is there anything you'd like to finish up on that we've not touched on, that we've not mentioned, that you'd like to get out there?
Let's think. I'll tell you this one last story before I go, which is very interesting. And his name escapes me because I'm not very good on people's names. But it was a medium who operated around the Newcastle area in the 1960s. He had a very own name, actually. And I think he died in 1965. So, you ask anyone around the Newcastle area, they've got to be quite elderly to remember this guy if they knew of him at all. Yeah. But he was a very modern kind of medium by all accounts. He wasn't boastful or anything like that, but he was extraordinary with his gifts of clairvoyance and that kind of stuff. But he was also an extraordinary physical medium. So he could manifest things in a seance room through ectoplasm, this mysterious substance that comes out your nostrils or your mouth or whatever and forms into shapes. Now, most people are familiar with it manifesting into a 6 or 7 foot tall Native American Indian or something like that, or, you know, your Auntie Bessie or whoever it may be. On this particular occasion, this medium said to these two guys, let's do a little bit of table tilting where we're going to put our hands on the table and see if the table rocks and taps and stuff like that. So these guys said, okay. So they started to prepare a table, and as they carried it across the room with this medium to put it into the center of the room, this medium suddenly fell into a trance, standing upwards and sort of like leant forward like that. And they said that this, and I think from the description, it must have been in some sort of semi-lighted room for them to see it, because I don't think they were bothering with infrared lights and that. So normally you have to do stuff in darkness or through infrared light to see it. But what happened was this ectoplasm came out of this guy's nose in 2 streams, and it started to form into 2 mounds on this table. And one mound grew up to be about that high, and the other mound grew up to be about that high. And they formed to 2 perfect but small human-sized figures in the period dress of the times of Elizabethan times. Right. So if you think of like Blackadder or something like that, one of the Blackadder shows, where it's they've got these collars, the lace, they describe them seeing perfect lace collars. They see the buckles on their belts and buckles on their shoes, but they were perfectly white, total white in color. One was a man, one was a woman, and they bowed to each other. And the witnesses, apparently, according to this story, were just total gobsmacked. They just like that, looking at them, and they bowed to the people. These foot-high Elizabethan people made out of, manifested. And once they did their bows and they bowed to each other again, they was only maybe there for 30 or 40 seconds. They disappeared into the mound of ectoplasm, went back up into the medium, and after a few minutes, he came out of his trance and he said, has anything happened? Because he was totally unaware of it. You see, he missed it. He totally missed it.
Wow, that's amazing.
So that's a very, very interesting story.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for joining us, Neil, tonight. And anytime that you've got some free time, we do different chats, different nights at week. You're always welcome to come on. And if you've got anything that you want to have advertised out there that you've got coming up, just give us a message and we can get you sorted. Paul's a wonderful chit chat Tuesday night as well for us. So
Thank you.
Never know. You might be back on with Paul doing more of this kind of talk, because I think it's absolutely fascinating. And I think there's so much more to talk about.
Thank you.
Do you want to give where people can find you? Have you got any pages or links to any pages, or is it just...
Yeah. Right. Well, they can go to my YouTube channel if they want to see our Paranormal Peep Show, which is a paranormal show that I co-host with Andy Chaplin. We do go out on Spreaker. That's where we get the most listens to, but we get a few hits on YouTube, not thousands or anything like that, but they go to Neil Peel, Neipeel, the Paranormal Peep Show, and they should be able to find that. And there's loads of episodes on there with us interviewing guests, like similar format to what you got here. And there's also a few of my talks on there where I've done talks around the country, and you'll perhaps hear them again on the YouTube channel, where I talk about the various things that people have told me, or the various things I've researched, or my own research at psychic demonstrations and things. And I will be appearing at the Probe conference, as I mentioned earlier, it takes place on the weekend of the 21st and 22nd of May at the YMCA building at Lytham St Anne's. So I think you have to go to probeinternational.com or .net, I believe, Probe International. You can find them on Facebook as well for details of how you can get tickets. But I'll appear in there on the Sunday morning, which will be the 22nd.
Marvelous. Anything on Facebook yet, Neil, or is it mainly over on YouTube?
Mostly on YouTube. I don't put out most of the ghosty stuff on Facebook. That's more for the artwork, really. If anyone's got any questions, or they want to tell me about an occurrence, an experience, they can email me. Just put in their subject line paranormal or something like that, so I can pick it out of all the other stuff. They can email me at Neil, Neil, at Geddes Ward. So it's GEDDESWARD.co.uk. Neil, Neil at Geddes Ward, GEDDESWARD.co.uk.
Marvelous.
Okay.
Joe's already shared me one of Neil Peel Paranormal Peep Show. Joe's already got that shared, so she'll be sharing other links also, and I will put all other links
Thank you.
on. Claire, everybody's loved tonight. Claire's put wow. Jules was brilliant on a Tuesday night. Anne's put thank you so much. Amazing night, Neil. Claire's put absolutely loved tonight. Thank you so much. I do need to rewatch as I had quite a few disturbances. Bless you. And Carol's put thank you for an awesome night, Neil. So thank you so much for giving your time to us this evening. And I'll let you pop off. Are you two all right to stop on for 10 minutes, or are you wanting to?
Yeah, about 10 minutes. Yeah, it'd be cool.
Yeah. All right then. So I'll let you say your goodbyes, Neil, and thank you so much again.
All right.
Joining.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
Cheers then. Good night.
See you soon.
Bye.
Sleep well. I hope my stories don't freak you out. All right.
Yeah, no. I'm
okay. Good night.
Dreaming of this woman. Night, Doug.
Good night.
I'll be dreaming of that 55-foot woman, eh? What an amazing gentleman. So much. I mean, so interesting. And we hadn't even covered off with what he gets his fingers involved in. You know, in like you said, there's that many different routes around paranormal. It's absolutely fascinating. And again, Paul's Tuesday chit chats. Well, this is where it's all happening. I saw a whole show. Yay, Charles!
Excellent.
Oh, bless him. Obviously, because Charles is across the water, and he's got like 5 days off, so I think he's due to go back to work soon. So obviously he's working when we're live and everything else. So it's brilliant. But yeah, definitely love to have Neil back on when he's got more time. To come
wonderful.
on. Definitely. And again, maybe Paul in a couple of months when you've got your
absolutely, it'd be good.
Get in touch with Neil and arrange for Neil maybe to come on a Tuesday night as well, because I think, like I said, I think there's so much more to come from Neil. Especially we covered quite a bit of Alien tonight. I'm the elemental girl. I want that information. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's just.
I think it's so broad. The subjects are all connected in some way or another.
Yeah, definitely.
Everything's connected. And I do like the thing about multidimensional, that it's kind of interlaced. Aliens, spaceships. I'm fascinated with sightings and, lights in the sky and, with reference to North Carolina and the Browns Mountain and the lights that go on there, because that's regular sighted. And I think there's also a mountain in Italy as well where lights are regularly sighted. I know that I asked Nick Pope various questions to see whether it was related to ancient sites specifically, but he said to his knowledge there was no correlation statistically. He couldn't, it was generally everywhere. So it wasn't kind of pinpointed to one specific area, although he did say, there are people that will argue the fact that it is kind of surrounding ancient sites more.
Yeah. I have seen his artwork. Anne's put, what's your best parts? I think she means what's your best parts from tonight? Is that meaning, Anne?
I think so. I think that's what I got from it.
What did you two go on, Paul? What did you enjoy most for tonight? I mean, me, it's all of it for me. I'm just mind blown. So yeah.
Oh, I like the 50-foot woman on the church.
Gotta admit, I'd love to. You know, I'd love to see. I would love to see that. But it makes me laugh that because obviously these guys have seen that. But you know, in Chesterfield, they always said that the crooked spire is crooked because the devil sat on it. The devil sat on it, and what is it, John? That they say about crooked spire? When will it straighten? When a virgin gets married in church. Chesterfield's got no virgin. Never gonna go. And I didn't mean that. I take that back. Chesterfield. I'll be hunted down in Chester. But yeah, that's it. And to hear a story where actually somebody's actually witnessed that and saw what they saw, and there was 3 of them there as a security guard as well. So it's not something that a security guard really would. It's not that they'd make up. Do you know what I mean? Genuine. Yeah, I think I would put 55.
And what I got from it, if you do see a 50-foot woman on a church, you know, and you want to get rid of it, be a good citizen and throw a stone.
Yeah.
I don't think I would do that.
I don't think I'd do that. Direction. No, if I look, I'd get squashed. They should definitely, they definitely leave the mark on me if I throw a stone at them. But isn't it funny that's like you said, that's the mentality of you in that moment. Let's throw something at it, you know. Big thing in front of you, but the mentality was that fight or flight. And I'm fighting. I'm picking a stone up, and then it's like, I mean, God, that would just. Yeah, that's got to be in class. But I like listening to Neil's stories. I think they are so interesting, and because it's about subjects that we are we're all got a passion for. We've all got some sort of involvement for it. I think it's brilliant. So yeah, but I'm going to pop across and have a look at his podcast. I don't think I've seen Neil's podcast. You know, that's a bit naughty of me.
There's also a great video I come across on YouTube where he's talking at some Glastonbury conference, like a big event. That's really worth a look.
Yeah. I do like these. I do like them when they're on.
Like a symposium at Glastonbury.
Yeah. Be interesting as well. I'm going to have a look at how much these tickets are to go see him at the Pro. I've wrote it down, but I've wrote Pro down, and I can't read my own writing. I know it says conference. I've put a T on end of conference. I don't know why, but T'd it at the end. So I'm thinking conference. So yeah, I'm gonna have a look at how much tickets are for that because it's only in Blackpool, and I think Blackpool's only about an hour and a half. I think hopefully from us. And I'd really like to go to one of these. I've never been to where you've got speakers coming on. I've never actually gone to anywhere where you've got like speakers on. So have
you, Paul?
Have I what? Sorry.
Have you been to a symposium like that where they've had speakers come on to talk about paranormal work?
Well, yeah. Well, I have been to. There was a thing called Ghost Fest some years ago. That was at one of the motor museums. But there's going to be one that I'm talking at Bosworth Hall, weekend of September. It's the 24th of September, and I'm one of the guest speakers there for about 45 minutes.
Get that a bit quiet, hadn't you?
Well, I've only just kind of been given the go-ahead, so I'm one of these people that until my name's on the poster or I've said it, there's actually a link to the website. I always keep it silent because during my DJ days, although, you know, law of attraction probably shouldn't really think like it, but some of you always used to say, we'll get you here at this nightclub. And, you know, been promised lots and lots of things, and I told people, and then you kind of feel rather silly after because it just fizzles out to nothing. So until it's out, you know, which it is now. Yes. Absolutely.
Get when you're ready for sharing that link out, Paul. Obviously, you've got Tuesday nights to get it shouted at and everything else, but don't forget to if you want me to post it up or send links out.
Thank you.
Again,
I'll send it through to you.
know, and I can get it
I'll
shared
share
out.
it as well.
Thank you.
So Jules has put, I'd be interested in going to see him if he ever comes to Winding Wheel in Chesterfield. Hey, Winding Wheel in Chesterfield, you never know. We might get a couple of these coming up this way now.
Yeah, I'll look into that.
Yeah, Winding Wheel in Chesterfield. So we are going to close it. I know John's got his pot off, and I think he wants a cup of tea because I can hear him. You know, I can hear him. He's mentally sending me this. I need a cup of tea. I haven't got my leg on. My leg is off. And I'm sure Paul's mom will be ready for a drink herself at this time as well. And
I think so.
Lana needs a top up on a wine.
I thought it was Ribena.
It is. Say it's Ribena, yeah. So thank you everybody for joining. Paul, very quickly, everybody knows, but just in case we've got any newbies on, where can everybody find you?
So they can go to my YouTube, Past Life Regressions with Paul Goddard. If you're interested in the NLP and hypnotherapy work that I do, it's Paul Goddard NLP and hypnotherapy. If you're interested in a load of random stuff, you can go to this is all YouTube. You can go to it just says Paul Goddard. You'll see my happy smiling face. You can go to my website, www.paulgoddardnlp.co.uk, and I also have the same pages, Paul Goddard Past Life Regressions and Paul Goddard NLP and hypnotherapy on Facebook. Or you can send me a friend request as well, but just say where you've seen me from, because I get some friend requests sometimes, like, who on earth this person? So if you kind of explain that you've seen myself on, Exploring the Afterlife, and then do send it through, because if you just friend everybody, sometimes they can then start.
You have to vet everybody before they come, because you just get people and you're like, where do I, because they're not even names I recognise, and it's like, where you come from?
Post office lottery is one that I tend to get through from people.
Lana, where can everybody find you?
I have a group page, Spirit Vibe. You can find me on Artist Lana Facebook, and website lanagrabinskis.com.
Yes.
Didn't know my own name.
So stay where you are, Paul, if you've got to shoot. Totally understand, my lovely. But Lana, if you want to keep on in chat. Claire, I might try and send you a link and see if I can add you into chit chat now afterwards. So I'll try and do that. I wonder if I have to send it while we're live. Hang on. You can send it. Oh, can I? Oh, it's all right. I'll send it after then. Right. So we are going to say good night, my lovelies. And thank you so much for everybody joining. Thank you two for coming on. And a big thank you to Neil. And wave to you, Neil, if you're watching still. So take care, everybody. Sweet dreams. Okay. Have a blessed day and evening. And we shall see you tomorrow. Much love, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.